Speak English, you bigot. The reason why I'm making this video is because every now and again I hear on the news that someone somewhere is being discriminated against because they don't speak the English language despite living and working in England or even immigrating to England. It has become evident in modern day England that learning the English language is no longer a requirement to work or drive or vote. Instead, the government and employers and the media openly encourage you to bypass this as translators and accommodations can be offered. I have made a few attempts at articulating my argument as to why it is imperative to have a main universal language and why it is a pillar of a functioning nation. However, the argument is a lot more nuanced and intricate than simple-minded buffoons would have you believe, and a simple rant does not suffice. I myself have emotional problems that hinders my ability to speak, hence the expression bite your tongue and choke on your own blood. I will attempt to extrapolate my understanding of this. Language, as a concept, is intrinsic in our capacity to think. The more comprehensive our vocabulary is, the deeper our thinking can be, and whether you choose to use introspection to hone that. This is the reason why words, written and spoken, should have a clear and concise definition. But that is just one aspect to languages. There are dozens of aspects to language which are associations, what words and or phrases can be associated with, interpretations. This can vary from individual or public to legal and eventually to the media. Subjectivity, objectivity, tone of voice, manner of speech, context regarding a conversation, and physical language such as gestures, body language, facial expressions, as well as cultures, religions, creed, and so on. All of these aspects contribute to language as a whole, and it is vital to understand that despite many of us being polyglots, being able to speak two or more languages, that there is a reason the English language has become the universal language of the world, in spite of its many significant flaws. It is also important to note the destruction of this universal language, or rather, the bastardization of it. Nowhere can this be more evident than the gender conundrum. Only recently has English law defined what a woman is, despite every rugrat wreaking havoc in the homes of families knowing instinctually what a woman is and what a man is. For some reason, in the Western Hemisphere, complexity is associated with and confused with intelligence, and whether the opposite is true for the Eastern Hemisphere is an answer I do not know. This is evident with how language is used when constructing laws and policies, and it raises another question. Is most of written and spoken language just junk or filler? For example, I spend a lot of time saying or like when thinking on my feet. Even amongst those who speak the same language, in this case English, language, or rather more accurately communication barriers, still exist, as an individual's ability to articulate themselves is dependent on a number of factors, with emotional psychological state being an important one. This further expands into why men and women alike become either abusive or self-abusive, requiring years, if not decades, of therapy. What type of therapy will depend on the individual. The communication barrier is also the result of not learning the main language used in the country, which can result in serious consequences such as workplace injuries and even death. Language and communication barriers, especially for frontline workers such as emergency staff and military personnel, is nothing short of sheer incompetence of management and willfully dangerous as lives are at risk. It never ceases to frustrate me that not being able to speak not being able to speak to a colleague or co-worker due to a language barrier is a total and utter oversight which has been nothing but perpetuated by the media and political class. They may sit behind a desk free from the consequences of their actions, but the working class are the ones who experience these consequences in the form of alienation. It is reasonable to suggest that violence is the failure of communication, as one side has been ignored or rebuffed or ridiculed into thinking they are moronic, stupid, idiotic, and are of no concern. And this is visible in the form of protests and demonstrations. Whether you agree with the argument or not, the message or concern still needs to be heard, and authoritative figures cannot bury their heads in the sand for too long. This applies strictly within homogeneous cultures and not different cultures, as that is the clash of opposing ideologies, beliefs, and attitudes which are both right and wrong simultaneously, as is the case in extremism and terrorism. The internet has pretty much become an archive of communication failures and individuals retroactively trying to one-up the opponent or change definitions in real time, leading to the bastardization of the English language and whatnot. This change in definition and semantics that occur in real time causes a rift, and even reasonable, rational men and women become susceptible to confusion and even manipulation. Ironically, despite having advanced technology at our disposal, translating languages is still a far cry from actually living and assimilating within a specific culture and or region. I'm not sure how far away technology is from this, but distinct dialects, nuances, verbal and non-verbal habits, to name just a few, can only be learned by directly engrossing and interfacing with the local indigenous population. You may have learnt to speak English or Spanish or Italian, but you have not learnt the more specific variations or slang forms of these languages. I am acutely aware that you cannot directly translate the German language into English or vice versa, and the same goes for the Russian language. I am also aware that some countries have a gendered language. This is not gendered in the political sense. It is completely separate from politics and is strictly cultural. I do have various nitpicks with translations. As someone who is fond of Japanese manga, I will give an example. The manga and anime Naruto, in the story the protagonist Naruto has an ability or technique called Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The word kage means shadow in Japanese, whilst the word bunshin means clone. The literal translation into English would be shadow clone jutsu. The no in the Japanese is excluded from the English translation. However, in DVD releases of Naruto, the translation and even subtitles read out Art of the Shadow Doppelganger, which I will always consider a bastardization of the Japanese to English translation, even though I'm a subtitles aficionado. I love my subtitles. This nitpick also comes with finding translations of books on philosophy as the source material. For example, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or Epictetus's Enchiridion has multiple different translations, each with its own pros and cons. Actually, it would be more accurate to say an interpretation rather than a translation. And Enchiridion was originally composed by Arion, a student or disciple of Epictetus. The whole point of this rather lengthy discussion or exploration of language is to highlight how important it is for a nation or civilization to have a universal language. Language is the encoding of experiences as thoughts. And since the English are currently experiencing a total destruction of their very history as well as their language, it is vital to address this.